I killed Thomas Mercer at 03:47 station time on a Tuesday. He was 23. A kid from Tulsa who talked about his dog in every briefing and couldn't play poker worth a damn. I'd spent 9 weeks in the same barracks rotation with him. I knew he chewed the inside of his cheek when he was nervous. I knew he wrote letters to his younger brother that he never sent. I knew he preferred his coffee cold because the heating unit in his quarters had been broken since week 2, and he'd stopped asking maintenance to fix it. I put 2 rounds through his plate carrier at close range, center mass, and when he folded, I stepped over him and kept moving down the corridor toward Sublevel 9. That was the first one. The last count I have, the one I trust, the one I went back and verified against the security footage after it was over, is 11. 11 men wearing the same uniform I wore, carrying authorization I'd have honored 6 hours earlier without blinking. 11 men I trained with, 8 beside, pulled watch with in the gray hours when the station hummed its low-frequency drone, and nobody talked, because there was nothing to say that the dark didn't already know. 11 of my own. Let me go back, not far. Just far enough for this to make sense if it can make sense, which I doubt, but you asked, and the recorder is running, and the Valori Diplomatic Commission wants a human account on file before the tribunal, so here it is. Kentar Station sits at the trailing edge of the disputed reach, a bloated fuel depot that the Terran Confederacy technically administers under a joint-use treaty nobody respects. 6,000 human personnel, roughly 900 Valori civilians in the Eastern Quarter. Merchants, families, engineers contracted through a labor exchange program that looked good on paper and functioned about as well as everything else out here, which is to say barely. The Valori kept to themselves. We kept to ourselves. There was a market on C-Deck where you could buy Valori spice cakes that tasted like burnt cinnamon and motor oil, and a few of the younger soldiers went there on off-rotation to trade ration packs for trinkets, because it felt like being somewhere instead of nowhere, and that was the full extent of cross-species community on Kentar. I am Sergeant First Class Robert Hale, 4th Expeditionary Security Battalion, and 6 months before the night I am describing, I would have told you with complete sincerity that I was a good soldier. I believed it, the way you believe in gravity, not as a proposition but as a condition of existing. I followed orders. I maintained discipline. I scored in the top 4% of my qualification cycle. I had a commendation from Colonel Wyatt Briggs himself for operational composure during the Rathani corridor incident, which is a polite way of saying I didn't panic when the hull breached, and I dragged 2 wounded men through hard vacuum for 11 seconds without a helmet seal. I did not consider myself a hero. I considered myself reliable. There is a difference, and if you've served, you know which one matters more. Colonel Briggs ran Kentar, had for 3 years. Career officer, the kind whose spine was machined from the same alloy as the station's keel. You looked at him and saw the system working exactly as designed. Competent, measured, iron-jawed when it mattered, human enough to remember your name and ask about your rotation. I respected him the way I respected bulkheads. You don't love a bulkhead. You trust it to hold. I trusted Wyatt Briggs to hold. What I did not know, what none of us in the lower security tiers knew, was that Briggs had received new operational orders 9 days before the night in question. Orders that came through a classified channel so restricted that even his executive officer, Major Travis Dunn, didn't see them until 72 hours before execution. Directive 771-Kappa. I've seen it since. The tribunal entered it into evidence, and I sat in the gallery and read the words on the display, and my hands did not shake because there is a point past which the body simply stops performing its commentary on what the mind has absorbed. The directive was 4 pages. The language was clean, military-grade clean, the kind of writing that makes horror administrative. The gist: Kentar Station's joint-use provisions had been identified as a strategic vulnerability. Valori civilian presence constituted a potential intelligence compromise. Relocation had been deemed operationally infeasible within the required timeline. The word relocation appeared once. The word clearance appeared 14 times. They were going to kill the Valori, all of them. 906 men, elders, and children living in the Eastern Quarter, sealed behind pressure doors at 0300 station time, cut off from communications, and cleared by a hand-picked platoon moving room to room under the operational fiction of a contamination lockdown. And the thing I need you to understand, the thing I need on this recording more than anything else, is that the men assigned to that platoon were not monsters. They were soldiers. Some of them I knew. Kyle Voss had shared a duty rotation with me for 4 months. Brandon Park and I spotted each other in the gym every Thursday. Dean Kowalski lent me a book about fly fishing once and asked for it back 3 times, and I kept forgetting, and he never got angry about it. Good men, the kind you trust at your flank. Briggs picked them because they were good, because they followed orders, because they believed, the way I believed, that the system held. I found out by accident. That's the part that sticks. Not providence, not instinct, not some buried moral sense that vibrated at a frequency only the righteous can hear. I found out because I was in the wrong corridor at the wrong time doing something I shouldn't have been doing. I was stealing coffee. The good coffee, the real stuff, not the reconstituted paste from Standard Mess, was locked in a supply cabinet on D-Deck that served the senior officer's briefing room. I knew the code because I'd watched Major Dunn punch it in once, and I have the kind of memory that holds numbers the way a drain holds hair. I'm not proud of it. It was petty larceny in service of caffeine, and on any other night the worst consequence would have been a write-up I'd have talked my way out of. But the briefing room was supposed to be empty at 21:30, and it wasn't. The door was open 2 inches. I heard Briggs's voice first, that particular low register he used when he was giving operational orders, not the public address version but the real one, the voice that meant this is happening and I need you to execute without hesitation. I'd heard it twice before. Both times it preceded something ugly. Both times I obeyed. I stopped, not out of caution, out of habit. You don't walk in on the colonel mid-briefing. You wait. Eastern Quarter pressure seals confirm at 0300, Briggs was saying. Voss, your team takes the commercial strip, D through G junctions. Park, you've got residential, levels 4 through 7. Kowalski handles the overflow shelters on 9. A voice I didn't recognize later identified as Captain Gunnar Hess from Confederate Intelligence, who'd arrived on station 48 hours earlier under a maintenance contractor cover. Responded with something about communication blackout protocols and jamming the Valori distress relays. And then Briggs said the sentence, the one that sits in the middle of my skull like a railroad spike and will not come out no matter how many times I describe it to the counselor the Valori Commission assigned me. No recordings, no survivors. Decontamination teams sweep at 0600. By morning watch, this was a reactor leak in the Eastern Quarter, and we lost 900 civilians to toxic exposure. Condolence dispatches go out by 1400. I stood in that corridor with a stolen coffee mug in my hand, and the ground opened under me, and I fell through it, and I am still falling. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for my hands to go cold. Long enough for the voices inside to move on to logistics, timing, ammunition loadouts, body disposal, the clinical vocabulary of organized murder spoken by men I'd have followed into a hull breach 12 hours earlier. I made it back to my quarters without being seen. I sat on my bunk and I did not move for 90 minutes. I want to tell you I was planning. I want to tell you I was running tactical calculations, weighing options, searching for the strategic fulcrum that would let me stop this with minimal casualties and maximum moral clarity. I wasn't. I was shaking. My teeth chattered like I was hypothermic, and the environmental controls read a steady 21 degrees, and my body didn't care what the thermostat said because my body understood before my brain did that I was about to die, because that's what stopping this meant. I knew it then. Not as a dramatic abstraction, I may have to sacrifice everything, but as a mechanical fact. I was one non-commissioned officer with a sidearm, a stolen coffee mug, and a growing nausea against a full-strength platoon backed by the station commander and Confederate intelligence. The math didn't work. It never worked. I went anyway. Let me describe Sublevel 9. Kentar Station was built by cutting into an asteroid, and the lower levels still bear the scars of the original mining operation, rough-hewn corridors, unfinished walls, the kind of architecture that happens when budget runs out before ambition does. Sublevel 9 was the deepest inhabited level. It housed overflow shelters for the Valori community temporary quarters that had become permanent the way temporary things always do, with cooking areas and a small school and a medical clinic run by a Valori elder named Thessyn, who had 2 sons and cataracts in both eyes, and mixed his own salves from plants he grew under ultraviolet lamps in converted storage bins. I knew Thessyn because I'd walked a patrol through Sublevel 9 every rotation for 5 months. He always offered me tea. It tasted terrible. I always drank it. This is not heroism. This is simply the way human beings become tangled in one another's lives when proximity persists long enough. Sublevel 9 had one access corridor. One. A single passage, 40 meters long, 3 meters wide, connecting to the main station lifts. That's it. The architects who carved Kentar out of rock were thinking about ventilation efficiency, not tactical geometry, but what they created was a bottleneck. Everything going in or coming out of Sublevel 9 passed through that corridor, including Kowalski's team, including every man assigned to clear the overflow shelters. I understood, sitting on my bunk at 2300, that I could not save the entire eastern quarter. I could not reach all 906 Valori scattered across multiple levels and pressure-sealed junctions. I did not have the time, the manpower, the communications access, or the authority to organize an evacuation against an operation designed by people who were better at logistics than I was. But Sublevel 9 had that corridor, and Sublevel 9 had 214 people in it, including the school, including the clinic, including Thessyn and his 2 sons, and his terrible T. One corridor, 40 meters, 3 meters wide. I could hold that. Not forever, not even for long. But the operation was designed to move fast in and out before anyone could report, before signals could escape the jamming envelope, before the Valori community even understood what was happening. Every minute of delay was a minute the plan bled coherence. Every minute of delay was a minute closer to the possibility that someone, a patrol officer on an adjacent level, a communications technician who noticed the jamming, a sensor operator who saw the pressure seals engage and asked the wrong question might break the information seal. I didn't need to win. I needed to make them late. I had my sidearm. 42 rounds across 3 magazines. I had my patrol kit, a medical pouch, 2 flash charges, a utility blade, and a hand comm that would be useless once the jamming went active. I had a working knowledge of Sublevel 9's layout from 5 months of walking it. I had the physical capability to move a storage crate, which I did, dragging a 200-kilo steel container to the mouth of the corridor and tipping it sideways as a barricade that would stop no bullets but would funnel movement in by seconds. And I had the codes for the emergency pressure doors on the far end of Sublevel 9, the doors that opened into the raw rock maintenance tunnels that connected, eventually, through a winding half-kilometer of unlit passage to external docking Bay 7. Bay 7. Where the Valori cargo shuttles sat on magnetic clamps, fueled and maintained, because the labor exchange program required the Valori to keep their own transport operational at all times. I went to Thessyn at 0100. I woke him by touching his shoulder, and when he opened his milky eyes and saw my face, he said quietly, "Something is wrong." "Yes." "How bad?" "Get everyone moving. The tunnel's behind the pressure doors at the end of the shelter. They connect to Bay 7. Get everyone on the shuttles and leave." He sat up. His hands were steady. I envied him that. "Sergeant Hale, what is happening?" I told him. "Not all of it. Enough." I told him what I had heard and what it meant and how much time I estimated he had, which was less than 3 hours. I told him I would hold the corridor. He looked at me for a long time. The light in his quarters was dim, a single UV lamp left on for his plants, and in that light his face was all shadow and patience, an old man who had lived through enough to recognize the shape of what I was describing without needing me to decorate it. "How many are they sending?" he asked. 8, maybe 10. "And you are one." "Yes." "You will die." "Probably." He reached out and gripped my forearm. Valori hands are longer than human hands and cooler, and his grip was stronger than I expected. "My sons," he said. "I know." He let go. He stood. He began moving. I went back to the corridor and I waited. They came at 0340, 7 minutes ahead of schedule. I heard them before I saw them, boots on deck plate, the particular rhythm of a stacked entry team moving with speed but not yet urgency. They didn't expect resistance on 9. Kowalski's briefing would have designated this as the soft target overflow shelters, civilians, a clinic, a school. Walk in, execute, walk out. 20 minutes. Behind me, the corridor stretched 40 meters to the pressure doors I'd jammed open. Beyond those doors, Thessyn and 214 Valori were moving through maintenance tunnels in the dark. I'd given Thessyn my hand torch. He hadn't asked for it. I pressed it into his eldest son's hands and told them to move fast, and not stop for anything. Some of them had looked at me as they passed. Most were too frightened to do anything but walk. A few of the young ones were crying without sound. That particular Valori distress vocalization, more vibration than noise, that you felt in your sternum. One child, maybe 4 years old, had turned back and stared at me from the pressure door threshold with eyes too large for his face, and his father had scooped him up and kept going. I had not told them what I was going to do. They could see the sidearm. They could see the barricade. They could do the math. The boots stopped. I pressed myself against the corridor wall, 6 meters from the overturned crate, sidearm up, breathing controlled the way they taught us. The way I'd practiced 10,000 times in qualification runs where the targets were silhouettes, and the stakes were a score and a comment on your file. Hail, Kowalski. I recognized his voice the way you recognize weather. He'd seen my profile on his helmet cam's IFF tag. My transponder was still active, still broadcasting friendly to every suit in the corridor. Hale, what are you doing down here? This area is under contamination lockdown. Clear out. He still thought it was a coincidence. A patrol officer who'd wandered into the wrong sublevel at the wrong time. An inconvenience to be redirected. Dean, I said, don't come down this corridor. Silence. I heard the faint click of a comm channel switching Kowalski calling it up. Calling Briggs, probably, or Hess. Rob. His voice had changed, just slightly, the way a river changes when the current shifts beneath the surface. Are you armed? Yes. Colonel Briggs has issued a direct operational order for this section. Whatever you think you heard, whatever you think is happening, you need to stand down and let us through. We'll sort it out after. I heard the briefing, Dean. I know what the order is. More silence. Longer this time. I could feel the team behind him recalibrating the stance shifts, the subtle repositioning that happens when a unit transitions from administrative movement to potential engagement. They were good. Of course they were good. Briggs picked them because they were good. You're one man, Kowalski said. And the way he said it, tired, almost sad. The way you'd talk to a friend who'd made a mistake too big to walk back told me everything. He understood. He understood what I was doing and why, and he was going to come through that corridor anyway. I know. There are 7 of us, Rob. I can count. The comm clicked again. When Kowalski spoke next, the sadness was gone, replaced by the operational register, the same voice Briggs used, the one that means this is happening now, and feelings are ballast. Sergeant Hale, you are in violation of a direct operational order. You have 10 seconds to disarm and withdraw. I didn't answer. Thomas Mercer came around the corner first. He was young. He moved fast. He had his rifle up and his muzzle swept the corridor, and his eyes found me in the half-dark. And I saw the exact moment he recognized me, and I saw his finger hesitate on the trigger. Not out of cowardice, but out of the simple mammalian refusal to shoot someone you know on sight. And in that hesitation, I fired twice, and he went down. The corridor compressed into something narrow and absolute. I am not going to narrate every shot. I refuse. You have the security footage. You have the ballistic reconstructions. You have the official timeline assembled by the tribunal's forensic team, who mapped each impact, each movement, each body's final position with the antiseptic precision of people who were not there and do not have to sleep with what happened. What I will tell you is this. They were better than me. Every one of them was better equipped, better supported, better positioned. They had body armor, they had comms, they had numerical superiority and the institutional authority of a lawful chain of command, and the psychological armor of men who believed they were following orders. But the corridor was 3 meters wide, and I knew every shadow in it, and they had to come to me. I used the crate, I used the utility alcoves, I used the fire suppression system 2 flash charges into the overhead sprinkler manifold, which didn't stop anyone but filled 20 meters of corridor with chemical fog that degraded their thermal optics for 40 seconds. 40 seconds during which I moved, and they couldn't track me, and 2 more went down. I took a round through my left shoulder at 0351, through and through. The pain was white and total, and then it wasn't adrenaline doing its temporary magic, buying me function on credit my body would collect later with interest. Brandon Park shot me. I know this because I saw his face when he did it, the flash of his muzzle behind his visor, the way his jaw clenched. I'd spotted him on the bench press every Thursday. I knew his maximum deadlift. I knew he kept a photo of his younger brother in his helmet liner. I shot him in the leg. He fell. He kept shooting. I moved. Kyle Voss died trying to climb over the crate. He was the fourth. I fired from 3 meters. He was looking right at me. He didn't say anything. People don't, usually. The movies lie about that. They don't say your name or make speeches. They just have a face and then they don't. Kyle Voss had a face, then he didn't. And I did that. That was me. My finger, my weapon, my choice. The corridor became a place I have never left. By 03:58, I had killed 5 men and wounded 2, and the remaining members of Kowalski's team had pulled back around the corner. I was behind the crate. My left arm was mostly useless. The shoulder wound had clotted badly, and the arm moved like it belonged to someone else, a laggy, unreliable thing that followed instructions with a half-second delay. My sidearm had 11 rounds left. My hands were slick. Some of the slick was mine. And behind me I could feel the emptiness like a pressure change. The corridor was clear. The pressure doors were open. The tunnels were dark and silent. Thessyn and 214 people were somewhere in that half-kilometer of rock, moving toward Base 7, and every second I sat here bleeding behind a steel crate was a second they were further from this place and closer to the shuttles. I want to be honest about what I felt. The tribunal asked me this. The Valori Commission asked me this. Everyone wants the emotional beat, the moment of clarity, the surge of purpose, the divine certainty that I was doing the right thing. Here is what I felt. I felt like throwing up. The chemical fog from the fire suppression system had settled into a thin haze, and the corridor smelled like accelerant and copper and something organic I will not name. My hands were shaking, not the fine tremor of adrenaline, but the deep structural shaking of a body that has crossed a line the autonomic system was never built to accommodate. I had killed people I knew. I had shot through their armor at ranges where I could smell their breath. And the worst part, the part that still wakes me up at 0300 every night on the Valori medical station where I am giving this testimony, is that I did it well. I was good at it. Everything they trained into me worked. The reflexes, the breath control, the target acquisition, the economy of movement. The system they built to make me effective had made me effective, and the people it made me effective against were the people the system had also built. Kowalski's voice came from around the corner. Not on the tactical channel, he was speaking openly, into the air between us, for my ears. "Rob, how many rounds do you have left?" I didn't answer. "We can wait you out, you know that. I've got 3 men here and Briggs has another team en route from the commercial strip. You have a pistol. We have time." He was right, tactically, absolutely right. I was a fixed position with a diminishing ammunition supply and a deteriorating body, and they had reinforcements and patience. The math hadn't changed. The math had never been in my favor. "The Valori are gone, Dean," I said. "They're in the tunnels. They're heading for Bay 7. You can kill me and walk down this corridor and find nothing but empty bunks and Thessyn's plants. It's done." Silence. Then, "Briggs is going to seal Bay 7 remotely." My stomach dropped. I hadn't thought of that. It was obvious Briggs had command access to every pressure door, every docking clamp, every launch authorization on the station. He could lock Base 7 from the operations center with 3 keystrokes. "He probably already has," Kowalski said, and his voice was strange and not triumphant, not cruel, but exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. "You killed 5 of my men, Rob. 5. For nothing. They're not getting off this station." I sat behind the crate with 11 rounds in my sidearm and a shoulder that was bleeding again, and the certain knowledge that Kowalski was probably right. And the ground opened under me again, and I fell through it again, and this time there was nothing at the bottom. For nothing. I'd killed 5 men I knew. I'd become the thing I was trying to prevent. And the people I was protecting were walking into a sealed docking bay with no exit, herded through maintenance tunnels into a steel box where Briggs could take his time. I want to tell you I rallied. I want to tell you my resolve hardened, my purpose crystallized, my jaw set with the determined granite of a man who refuses to break. I put my head against the crate and I closed my eyes and I breathed in the copper air, and I felt nothing except the bone-deep conviction that I had failed in a way that would cost 214 lives, and every life I'd taken was wasted, and I was going to die in this corridor, and the only thing I'd accomplished was proving that the system's most reliable product was a man who could kill his own people with precision and efficiency. That was my lowest point. 0403 station time, alone behind a crate, everything lost. Then my handcom buzzed. The jamming was still active. I knew this because I'd tried to transmit 3 times since taking position and gotten nothing but dead air. Kentar's communications array was locked under Briggs's override, and every civilian frequency within the station's electromagnetic envelope was suppressed. But the buzz wasn't coming from inside the station. I looked at the comm. The signal identifier was Valori. A shortwave burst on a frequency so low it had crawled under the jamming threshold like water under a door. The Valori used these for intra-community messaging, short range, practically line of sight. I'd seen Thessyn's sons use them to call each other for meals. The message was text only. 4 words in broken standard. Bay 7 open. Launching. I stared at it. Much later, I learned what had happened. Thessyn's eldest son, a young man named Thessyn, who had worked in the station's maintenance division for 2 years, had standing access to Bay 7's environmental controls through his janitorial clearance. Not the docking clamps, not the launch authorizations, the air recyclers. But Kentar Station's docking bay systems were 30 years old, and the firmware had been patched so many times that the subsystems were cross-threaded in ways the original engineers never intended. Thessyn knew this because he'd spent 2 years crawling through those systems with a wrench and a flashlight, doing the invisible work that kept the station breathing. He knew that cycling the air recyclers in Bay 7 in a specific sequence triggered a diagnostic reset that briefly unlocked the magnetic clamps as a safety precaution. A 3-minute window designed to allow emergency manual release in case of atmospheric failure. 3 minutes. That's what Thessyn found. 3 minutes of unlocked clamps, bought by a janitor's knowledge of a 30-year-old firmware bug, while Briggs sat in the operations center believing his lockdown was absolute. Thessyn's people launched 2 cargo shuttles in those 3 minutes, 214 Valori. They flew blind into open space on short-range engines with no navigation support and no destination, because the alternative was staying. The message reached me through rock and shielding and a jamming envelope designed by Confederate intelligence because a Valori elder's son understood the station's bones better than the people who commanded it. I sat behind the crate and I read those 4 words, and I did not rally. I did not harden. I did not set my jaw. I cried. Briefly, violently, the kind of crying that arrives without permission and leaves without apology. It lasted maybe 10 seconds and it came from a place I don't have vocabulary for, somewhere below the diaphragm where the body stores the things the mind refuses to process. And then it was over, and I wiped my face with my functional hand, and I stood up. Dean. No answer. They're gone. 2 shuttles already launched. Check with Briggs, Bay 7 is empty. I heard the comm click. A long pause. Voices too low to resolve, and then Kowalski's voice again, changed again, harder now, sharp with the particular fury of a professional who has been outmaneuvered by a janitor. Briggs is sending intercept. My blood went cold. The station had point defense systems, short range designed for debris and incoming missiles, but more than capable of shredding an unshielded cargo shuttle at close range. Dean, they're civilian shuttles. There are children on board. You killed 5 of my people, Rob. Don't do this. You made your choice. Briggs is making his. I stood in that corridor and I understood with total clarity that the corridor was no longer the battleground. The battleground had moved. It was outside, in the vacuum between the station and 2 slow-moving cargo shuttles, carrying 214 people, and I could not reach it from here. But I could reach something else. I had 11 rounds and 1 functioning arm, and a knowledge of Kentar Station's layout that 5 months of patrol had etched into my nervous system. And I knew the way you know the location of your own heart that the point defense targeting system was controlled from a relay junction on D-deck, 40 meters above me, 3 corridors over. Behind a door I had the code to because I'd watched Major Dunn punch it in while I was stealing coffee. I ran. I do not know how I made it from Sublevel 9 to D-deck in the time available. The security footage shows it. The tribunal played it back at reduced speed, and I watched myself on the display, a bleeding, gray-faced man in a half-sealed uniform, moving through corridors at a velocity that the station physician later said should not have been physiologically possible given the blood loss and soft tissue damage already sustained. He used the word anomalous. I think he meant desperate. I took the maintenance shaft between levels 5 and 3 because the main lifts were locked under Briggs's override. A vertical ladder, 12 meters, with a shoulder wound that turned every rung into a negotiation between my right hand's grip strength and my left arm's increasingly creative interpretations of basic motor commands. I made sounds on that ladder I am not interested in describing. At the top, I kicked the access panel out with both boots and rolled onto the D-deck service corridor floor and lay there for 4 seconds, which is the longest I've ever stared at a ceiling in my life. D-deck was quiet. The operation was concentrated in the eastern quarter levels 3 through 7, and the command infrastructure was above me on A-deck. D-deck was administrative, offices, briefing rooms, the supply cabinet I'd been trying to burglarize 9 hours earlier when the world ended. The relay junction was 30 meters from where I lay. I got up. I moved. My left boot was wet inside, and I did not look down to confirm why, because I did not need that information. The relay junction door code still worked. Dunn's code. 5 digits, the same ones I'd memorized to steal coffee, now buying me access to the targeting subsystem that controlled whether 2 cargo shuttles full of children lived or died. I am not a technician. I want this on record. I do not understand fire control software. I do not understand targeting algorithms. I have never taken a systems course beyond the basic familiarization module that all security personnel complete in week 3 of qualification. But I understand power conduits. I understand them because Robert Hale, before he was a soldier, was a 20-year-old apprentice electrician in Fort Wayne in Indiana, who spent 2 years pulling wire through commercial buildings before the recruitment office offered him something that sounded more important. I understand junction boxes and bus bars and the physical reality of how energy moves from a source to a system. And when I opened the relay junction panel, I was not looking at software. I was looking at cables. 4 primary power feeds ran from the junction to the point defense array. Heavy gauge, shielded, marked with the orange bands that indicate weapons-grade power infrastructure. Each one carried enough current to light a city block, and each one was held in place by mechanical clamps and redundant connectors, designed to survive exactly the kind of amateur interference I was about to attempt. I had a utility blade, a short, heavy thing meant for cutting packing straps and ration pouches, not a wire tool, not an insulated cutter, a blade. I severed the first cable, and the arc flash blew me backwards 2 meters and took the skin off 3 fingers on my right hand. The pain was extraordinary, bright, specific, radiant, the kind of pain that has a color. My ears rang. My vision shrank to a tunnel. The junction box was sparking. I crawled back to it and cut the second cable. The arc was smaller this time. The system was already losing coherence, the power cycling erratically. The third cable I managed without incident because the breakers had tripped and the current had dropped to survivable levels. But by then, my right hand was a blistered, slippery thing that could barely close around the blade's handle. The fourth cable I did not need to cut. The system was dead. The point defense array had lost its targeting feed and the display panel on the junction wall. The one I could still read through the smoke, and the tunnel vision showed 4 red indicators where green ones had been. The shuttles were outside. The guns were offline. I sat on the floor of the relay junction with my burned hand in my lap and my useless arm hanging at my side and the taste of copper and ozone in my mouth, and I listened to the station alarms beginning to sound, not the operation alarms, not the classified tactical channels, but the real ones, the general emergency warnings that triggered automatically when a weapon system lost power without authorization. The alarms meant people were waking up. The alarms meant sensor operators and duty officers and patrol teams across the station were looking at their displays and seeing something that didn't match the contamination lockdown story. The alarms meant the information seal was broken, and Briggs knew it. Wherever he was, operations center probably, watching his plan hemorrhage coherence, he knew the window was closing. I heard boots in the corridor outside the junction, running. The boots were not Briggs's people. Major Travis Dunn came through the relay junction door with 2 security officers behind him, and his sidearm drawn and his face carrying an expression I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not confusion, but the particular mask of a man who is assembling a picture from incomplete fragments and does not like what he sees. "Hale," he said, "what the hell happened to you?" Sir, I tried to stand. My legs debated the proposition and rejected it. Sir, I need to report. I've been getting reports for the last 15 minutes. Half the station thinks we have a reactor breach. The other half thinks we're under attack. I've got 5 bodies on Sublevel 9 in Confederate uniform, and the eastern quarter pressure seals are locked from the command level, and the point defense array just went dark and you are sitting in the middle of it looking like you lost a fight with an electrical fire. Sir, Directive 771-Kappa. He stared at me. The colonel received orders to eliminate the Valori civilian population, tonight. A hand-picked team, contamination lockdown cover story. I overheard the briefing at 21:30. The team is on Sublevel 9. My voice did something I did not authorize. I killed 5 of them, sir. I held the corridor. The Valori evacuated through maintenance tunnels to Base 7. 2 shuttles launched. I severed the point defense power feed to prevent interception. Dunn did not move for 10 seconds. I counted. His face went through something private and I watched it happen, and I will not describe it because it was his, and I've taken enough from the people around me tonight. You have evidence? My hand comm has a recording from 21:30. I set it to capture when I realized what I was hearing. And the security cameras on Sublevel 9 were running. Briggs's team didn't disable them because the feeds route through a secondary server that isn't on the classified network. Dunn turned to the 2 officers behind him. Lock down the operations center. Nobody in or out. Get me a direct line to Confederate command, priority override, my personal authentication. They moved. Dunn looked at me for another long moment. Then he crouched down so we were eye level, and his voice dropped to something that was not a command. How many, Rob? 11. I said it clearly. I owed them that. I killed 11. He didn't touch me. He didn't offer comfort. He just nodded once and stood, and walked out of the junction. I sat there. The alarms were still sounding. Somewhere above me, the station's legitimate command structure was waking up and discovering that the night had happened and could not be taken back. Somewhere outside, 2 cargo shuttles were moving through open space carrying 214 people who were alive because a janitor understood firmware better than Confederate intelligence. And somewhere on Sublevel 9, in a corridor 40 meters long and 3 meters wide, 5 men who had been alive at 0340 were not alive anymore. And nothing I had done or would do or could ever do would change that. I looked at my hands. The right one was burned. The left one was bloody. Both of them were mine. The next part happened without me. I want that noted. I was taken to the medical bay at 0430 and sedated over my objections, and I missed the part where the story became something larger than one man in a corridor. Here is what I've been told. Major Dunn assumed command of Kentar Station at 0441, citing Colonel Briggs's removal under Article 7 of the Confederate Military Code. Briggs did not resist. Captain Hess did resist briefly, and was subdued by 2 security officers who'd seen the Sublevel 9 footage and were in no mood for negotiation. The 2 Valori shuttles were recovered 40 minutes after launch by a Valori merchant vessel, the Tesserath, which had been transiting the sector on a routine cargo run and detected the distress frequency that Thessyn's people had been broadcasting since clearing the station's jamming envelope. 214 Valori, all accounted for. Thessyn later testified that the maintenance tunnels had taken the group 53 minutes to traverse in darkness, with children and elders moving at the pace of their slowest member. He said the tunnel was cold and the rock was sharp, and his sons had carried 4 children who could not walk fast enough. He said that when they reached Base 7 and Thessyn began cycling the air recyclers, nobody spoke, because the sound of the magnetic clamps releasing was the first sound any of them had heard in an hour that was not breathing or crying. He said they did not know whether I was alive or dead. He said his eldest son asked him once in the tunnel, and he said he didn't know. He said he prayed. He said he prayed for a human, which he had never done before, and he did not know if his gods had jurisdiction, but he did it anyway. Directive 771-Kappa was disavowed by Confederate command within 72 hours. The official statement used language I won't repeat because it was designed to minimize institutional culpability, but the operational reality was clear. Briggs and Hess and 17 others in the command chain were arrested, charged, and eventually tried. Briggs was convicted of conspiracy to commit mass murder, He is serving consecutive life sentences on a penal station in the Outer Ring. I am told he does not speak. Dean Kowalski was charged as an accessory. At his tribunal hearing, he testified that he believed the operation was legally authorized and that he was following a direct order from his commanding officer. The tribunal accepted this as a mitigating factor. He received 12 years. I don't know where he is now. I don't want to know. Brandon Park survived the leg wound. He was medically discharged and sent home. I am told he walks with a limp. I am told he does not blame me. I do not know what to do with that information. The 2 wounded men and the 6 members of the other strike teams who had not yet engaged the ones tasked with the commercial strip and the residential levels were arrested before they reached their staging points. The alarm I triggered by severing the power feeds disrupted the operation's timeline enough that Dunn's intervention reached them before they breached. The eastern quarter's remaining Vylori, 692 people on levels 3 through 7, were locked behind pressure seals for 4 hours and 17 minutes. They heard the alarms. They did not know what was happening. Some of them thought it was a drill. Some of them thought the station was dying. None of them died. Because the timeline broke. Because Briggs lost his window. Because a janitor knew how firmware worked, and a sergeant knew how cables worked, and neither of those things was supposed to matter, and both of those things were everything. I was cleared of wrongful conduct by the tribunal after 11 days of testimony. The findings stated that my actions constituted justified use of force in defense of civilian life against an unlawful order, consistent with Article 4, Section 9 of the Confederate Military Code, which establishes that a soldier's obligation to protect non-combatants supersedes obedience to orders that violate the laws of armed conflict. Article 4, Section 9. I'd never read it before that night. I didn't know it existed. I held that corridor on instinct and nausea and the taste of Thessyn's terrible tea, and the legal framework that justified what I did was something I learned about after the fact, sitting in a hospital bed with my hands wrapped in gauze. The law said I was right. The law was correct. The law does not help. I live on the Vylori medical station now, resettlement arrangement part of the diplomatic package that followed Kentar. The Vylori government offered residency to the human personnel who intervened, and Major Dunn and myself and 11 others accepted. I accepted because I cannot go home. Not legally. Legally, I am free. I am cleared, commended, technically eligible for reinstatement at full rank with back pay, and a note in my file that future commanders would read and nod at approvingly. I am, in the official record, a man who did the right thing. I cannot go home because Fort Wayne, Indiana, is full of people who have not shot their friends, and I do not know how to stand in a grocery store next to men who sleep without medication and pretend that we are the same species. I wake at 0300 every night. The station's environmental cycle dims the lights at 2200 and raises them at 0600, and my body ignores all of it and puts me upright in the dark at 0347, because 0347 is when Thomas Mercer came around the corner, and I do not get to choose which appointments my nervous system keeps. Thessyn lives 4 corridors from me. His sons visit on rotation. His eldest, Thessyn, the janitor who saved 214 people with a firmware exploit, is studying engineering at a Vylori Technical Institute. He will be brilliant. He was already brilliant. He was brilliant the entire time he was mopping floors on Kentar Station, and nobody with authority noticed because the system is not designed to see brilliance in a janitor the way it is not designed to hear a warning in a cup of terrible tea. Thessyn brings me that tea every morning. It still tastes like burnt cinnamon and motor oil. I still drink it. We do not talk about the corridor. We do not talk about the tunnel. We sit in his quarters under the UV lamps with his plants growing around us in their converted bins. And we drink tea, and sometimes his youngest son reads to us from a Vylori text I do not understand, and the sound of his voice is not peace, but it is present. The commission wants a statement about what I did, a clean narrative, a shape they can put in an archive and point to when they need an example of something moral courage, they call it, or the human capacity for conscience, or the individual's obligation to resist unjust authority. I resist these framings. I resist them specifically and deliberately because they require me to be something I was not. I was not brave. Brave is a word for people who are afraid and choose to act despite the fear. I was not afraid in the corridor. I was past fear. I was in the place on the other side of fear where the body operates on its own instructions, and the mind is a passenger watching the hands do things it did not authorize. I did not choose courage. I chose nothing. I moved because staying still was not mechanically possible for the organism I am. And the organism I am was shaped by 5 months of terrible tea, and a child staring at me from a pressure door threshold, and a janitor's steady hands and an old man's grip on my forearm. I was also not merciful. Mercy is restraint. I showed no restraint. I fired at men who had been my colleagues, and I fired to kill, and I killed them with the competence the system built into me, and I did not hesitate except once, with Park. And that hesitation was not moral, it was muscular, a flinch in the shoulder that the wound imposed on me without my consent. What I was, what the record should reflect, if records are for truth rather than comfort, is a man who found himself at a junction between two instructions that could not coexist. The system said, "Obey." The corridor said, "They will kill the old man and his plants and the child with the 2 large eyes." And the organism that is Robert Hale could not hold both of those things simultaneously, and one of them fell away. I did not choose which one fell. I want to believe I did. The commission wants me to say I did. The narrative requires it, the hero choosing conscience over obedience, the individual rising above the machine. But I was in that corridor, and I know what it felt like, and it felt like gravity, like falling in the only direction available. And the direction happened to be the right one, and the people behind me lived, and the people in front of me didn't. And I carry both of those facts in the same body, and they do not reconcile, and they will not reconcile, and I have stopped asking them to. 11 men, 214 saved. The math does not balance. It was never going to balance. There is no formula that converts the dead into the living and produces a remainder of 0, and anyone who tells you otherwise has not stood in a 3-meter corridor with a sidearm, and the knowledge that the next face around the corner belongs to someone who lent you a book about fly fishing. I keep the book. Dean Kowalski never asked for it back after that night. It sits on my shelf in my quarters on the Vylori medical station, between a Vylori grammar primer Thessyn gave me and a maintenance manual Rethin brought over as a joke. I have not opened it. I do not fish. I keep it because it was given to me by a man who was following orders, and I was the thing that stood between those orders and their completion, and the book is the last object that passed between us when we were still the same thing. We were good soldiers. That was the problem. The system does not fail when it produces bad men. The system fails when it produces good men and gives them orders that require them to stop being good, and the architecture holds long enough for the hands to move before the conscience can catch up. I caught up. That's all. That's the entire story. I caught up 4 seconds faster than Kowalski, 9 seconds faster than Mercer. And the gap between catching up in time and catching up too late is the gap between being on this side of the recording and being on the other side of it, and that gap is not virtue. It's the width of a corridor, 3 meters, the distance between what you are and what you do. Thessyn is at my door. I can hear him. He has the tea. His youngest is with him. I can hear the child's voice, that particular Vylori cadence that rises at the end of every sentence like a question, like the whole language is built from people checking whether you're still there. I'm still here. Not because I'm brave, not because I'm good, because an old man makes me tea every morning, and a child reads to me in a language I don't understand, and the sound of that voice is the only thing I've found that fits in the space where the 11 names live, not to cover them, not to quiet them, but to prove that the corridor is not the only room I'm in. It's 0347. I'm awake. I'm always awake. But the tea is here, and the voice is here, and the morning, whatever it is, whatever it costs, is here. And I go to the door,